Kathleen asks, will Sayrite ever design and offer a cylinder arm sewing machine? Oh, this is awesome. Hi, I'm Eric Grant with Sailrite. I've been working with Sailrite for probably 30 years at different times. Actually, my father, Jim Grant, started the company many years ago. I've seen a lot of pictures of myself in diapers with him sewing sails in the driveway, and I've learned most of my skills from him, and then obviously from trial and error through working through Sailrite for these many years. We've recently sent out a post on several of our social media platforms asking you guys to ask me any type of question you have regarding sewing, the company, or even my personal life. And here are the results. Okay, Macrobob asks, will you make a video on a cover for a center console? Yes, we will. Usually it requires a boat. If we don't have the boat, I can't make it. We get boats periodically and we do all kinds of projects. So that will be one definitely in the future. I don't know when. Joanne says, frustrated making nice square turns. Ugh, can't seem to get her done. Well, practice does make perfect, but we do have a lot of videos at the Sayrite website that show you how to make a 90-degree turn. I assume we're talking about cushions, so check them out. Bukata asks, longtime subscriber here, I've noticed that you take great pride in bearing a wicked, well-groomed, perfect stache. What is your daily grooming routine to maintain such an award-winning specimen of facial hair placement? Does it give you great power to take on any sewing project? Thanks for the great videos all these years. Cheers to the stache. How do I maintain my stache? Dry wall dust, sawdust, spray glue from upholstery applications, and sweat, okay? Because I do all those things. I'm a DIYer. I love to build things. And my stache keeps it all from getting in my mouth. I don't know, sorry. Thank you for your kind comments. Brandon says, I would love to see a series of videos by Eric that talks about the most common questions and issues people call and email Sayrite support folks for. So our support team has said that these are some of the most common questions. How to prevent tension troubles that are caused by improper needle and thread size in relation to the fabric. That's a phenomenal question, and actually it's a problem that happens all the time. Almost weekly I deal with those issues. So if you use a lighter fabric, which is usually the problem because most of our customers are sewing heavy things, they often will not switch the needle size to a smaller needle, and also the thread size is too large. So when the thread is tensioned up into the fabric, the knot on the bottom side is being pulled into the layer of fabric, and because the thread is too large and the hole that the needle created is too large, there's nowhere for that knot to go, and it just puckers up the fabric. So when customers call and say, my fabric is all puckered up, what's wrong? They usually blame it on the sewing machine, but it's often only the fact that the needle size is too large and the thread is too large. What you need to do is move down to a smaller needle and thread size and then reverse the upper tension a little bit, and usually you can get a perfect stitch. Another question that the support staff get a lot is how to use a binder and keep the fabric in the binding. That too is a phenomenal question. Most people are paying attention to the binder at the entry point of the binder, and they're trying to push their fabric up against that. But the binder is designed with a special curve in it to keep the binding from getting kinked. If you pay attention to that point, it's basically pushing your fabric assembly away from the fold. But if you pay attention to the exiting point of the binder where the binding is coming out and you keep your fabric pushed in there, you will find that your fabric is pushed well into the fold and you shouldn't have any problems. Customers also ask, how do I select the right seating vinyl or even canvas fabric? Well, there are a lot of brands out there, and a lot of them are great brands. One of my favorite seating vinyls, which is reasonably priced, is EverSoft. And why is that? Well, it's got a good fabric backing, which actually has a flocking on the back side, so you can actually use spray glues and so forth and it won't reach the vinyl. But it's also a four-way stretch vinyl, so you can actually pull it tight to work it into your cushions or to staple it or on a backer board. So it's a great vinyl. I use it in almost all of my projects. Now let's talk about canvas, which is usually referred to as a 100% solution dyed acrylic fabric. Well, there are all types of brands out there and all of them are very good. Sunbrella is the most well-known brand, but Sattler is a brand that Sayrite just recently picked up that's every bit as good as Sunbrella, but less expensive. So I've been using Sattler in all of my new projects, and you'll probably see a lot of kits coming out in Sattler 100% solution dyed acrylic marine grade fabrics coming soon here at Sayrite. I think you'll love the stuff and you'll especially love the price. Another question is, how much seam allowance should I allow for in cushion making? Well, the issue of having too little seam allowance in a cushion is that your stitch may be so close to the raw edge of the fabric that it is weaker. In other words, there's not as much woven fabric to hold that stitch in place. So that's why I always stay away from 1/4 inch. Sometimes I sew 3/8, but very rarely. Usually all my cushions are sewn in a 1/2 inch seam allowance. That keeps that stitch away from any raw edge that wasn't cut with a hot knife, which basically makes the seam a lot stronger. Okay, I get emails all the time asking about how much fabric and how much foam is required for a particular project. And usually this isn't somebody that's building a single cushion, it's usually several cushions. Well, Sayrite has a great fabric calculator that you can use to determine that. We have a calculator that determines exactly how much foam you need, and you can actually nest each one of the foam pieces on a running length of foam and move them around, flip them, turn them until you get the perfect nesting. And did you know that you can actually glue sections of foam together? So if your foam is not large enough for your particular cushion and you need to add a piece, you can always cut it and glue it together. So we have a great calculator for that, and we also have a calculator that determines how much fabric you need for your cushion and the type of cushion you're making. So check it out at the Sayrite website. Okay, here's a question that you guys ask a lot of, especially you guys that own a Sayrite Ultrafeed sewing machine, the LSZ. Do we have an edge guide foot for that machine for a top stitch? No, not yet. We don't have that. We have one for the Sayrite Fabricator sewing machine and it works phenomenally. I will say that here at Sayrite, we're constantly developing new parts for our sewing machines. That's why you should always buy a Sayrite machine, because we're constantly improving it year by year. And I actually have a 3D print of a foot that we're trying to experiment with the LSZ. It has a lot of bugs and problems and we haven't worked them out. So it could be years before we have one. In the meantime, all you have to do for a top stitch is just use either the center foot on the left side or the right side and keep that center foot along that first stitch, and your top stitch will still be beautiful. I don't hesitate to sew top stitches on the Ultrafeed sewing machine, and I love to sew them on the Fabricator sewing machine with the special foot, but you don't need to have it. It's just a bonus that makes your top stitch a little bit sweeter and easier to make, but you can do it without it. So don't you hesitate to sew a top stitch on the Sayrite Ultrafeed sewing machine, because it still can look beautiful with a little bit of patience and a little bit of finesse. So Kathleen asks, will Sayrite ever design or offer a cylinder arm sewing machine? And the answer is yes. Have we done it yet? Yes and no. There is one in the works and may eventually come out in the future. We have a lot of things to nail down, but yes, I think in future years you will see a Sayrite cylinder arm sewing machine to make those tight turns possible. Okay, Carla asks, hey Eric, I looked online but have not found any reason why to use a continuous boxing versus a seamed boxing on cushions. Our home sofas used continuous, but our Airstream original cushions used seam boxing. Can you explain this, the pros and the cons? A great question, and one that is really can be summed up with one thing, and then there are a few other things that are small things. Continuous boxing goes all the way around, so at the corners there's no seam. It's just for looks, okay? So if you want a cushion that doesn't have stitching at the corner, you pick a continuous boxing. Seamed boxing is actually easier if the fabric is light to medium weight, because you just can basically make all the sides of the cushion a specific length and sew them together and then make sure that those seams land on the corner. One area where a seamed cushion may be a little bit more difficult is if you're using a heavy seating vinyl, where you have the seam at the corner and you also have to turn to make that 90-degree corner. And that may be a good reason to use a continuous boxing if you're using a heavy vinyl. But you can still achieve it even with a seamed corner. So number one, the main reason is looks. Damien asked, does the LSZ tend to run away on you when sewing? Well, it doesn't really run off on me now with the WorkerB Power Pack system. That system allows you to turn down the machine so you never sew it faster than you ever want to, and you can turn it up for higher speeds as well. And you even at the higher speeds, you have super low speed control. Now in the past with older machines, it probably was a little bit more difficult when the needle would try to penetrate a thick assembly, and you'd have to press down a little bit harder on the foot pedal to get it to go, and then all of a sudden it goes dut, 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 dut. And so it would take off on you a little bit then. But now we've resolved that problem, so it's no longer an issue at all. Okay, Slamhead asks, why has my LSZ developed a knocking sound by the flywheel? I found one YouTube short where the guy just changed the position of the locking pin, the posi pin. That doesn't work for me. My machine has not been heavily used. I have thoroughly oiled the machine, but have not tested to see if that solved it. What's causing the knocking? Well, the locking pin is called the posi pin, and the posi pin can go into what we call the posi pin bushing, and there's, I think, 4 holes in it. And if it's positioned in one of those holes at the location, whereas the needle would enter a thick assembly, and the posi pin is just engaging at that exact moment, you can hear a pop because the balance wheel has to have a little bit of slop in it. If it didn't have slop, you wouldn't be able to push the posi pin in easily and remove it. So you can hear that little bit of a slop if it's in the wrong position. It's not a mechanical problem at all, but it can really just be resolved usually by moving it to another hole. Now if you're using the balance wheel that's plastic and not the metal one called the Monster 2 balance wheel, I have seen 2 of them actually have cracks on the backside, and that enlarges the hole. So you may want to take off your balance wheel and turn it around and inspect it. Now, with all that said, what you should do is you should contact support. We're phenomenal at answering questions like that and working with you. So please feel free to email us, and we'll put it in a support case and try to get you the best help possible. So Patty asks, what's my favorite DIY project and why? Well, there are a lot of projects that I actually loved making, but my favorite was probably the wire hung canopy that I installed on a pergola. Why was it my favorite? Well, it's something that I basically invented from the ground up, and it actually worked beautifully. I think there's some ways that it can be improved today, but we haven't redone that video. It was one of our most popular videos on the Sayrite DIY YouTube channel that you can find in the upper right-hand corner. After sewing a project like that and having it come out beautifully and successful like that, it probably made it my favorite project because I came up with it. So Jim asks, what's the easiest way to replace isinglass, which is a clear vinyl window material, using the old canvas? Well, if you're trying to reuse the old canvas and your isinglass is mainly larger than your canvas, then the best way to do it is to sew the new isinglass in before you cut out your old isinglass. Otherwise, you'll find it nearly impossible to get everything in the perfect order. Then, after you have the preliminary stitch in place holding the new clear vinyl, you would cut out the old one and then do your finishing work. It's a lot of labor, so sometimes it's better just to start new. The fabric doesn't cost that much more. You have a panel you can copy right now. You have new glass that you're already replacing, which costs a lot of money. The labor is probably the most consumable part in this whole thing. I mean, it's free if you're doing it yourself, but spend the money, just do it over. That's my opinion. So Jaden asks, I see there's a manual balance wheel that you can use without power. Is this actually viable? Well, with the WorkerB Power Pack system, you don't really necessarily need a hand crank to be very precise. You know, that's usually the reason that we had a hand crank before. Obviously, if you don't have power, you have to have the Monster 2 balance wheel with hand crank. But now with the WorkerB Power Pack system, you can slow that machine down and almost get the exact same performance as hand cranking. Actually, I'm going the wrong way. Hand cranking. Yeah, there are reasons for the hand crank. If you're taking your machine to a park bench and you're sewing zippers for all your crewmates and you don't have power, excellent reason to have a hand crank. So you may want to think about purchasing the Monster 2 balance wheel for those types of applications. Okay, Richard asks a phenomenal question, and one that I'm going to say, sorry, buddy. Can the Sailrite LSZ sew in polycarbonate windows? If so, what's the recommended needle and thread? Can it sew through that? Yes. It's like hammering a nail through a board, so every time the needle penetrates, it's bang, 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 bang. And eventually the machine's going to go out of time. It's not built for that. It's not built to go to pound a nail through a board, and that's what polycarbonate's like. So we don't recommend it. I'm sorry. It'll do it. It just means you have to time your machine probably a little more often than others. Now we have the new posi pin safety shear that will probably break quite often if you're doing that to keep the machine from going out of time, but this machine really wasn't designed for that kind of application, so we don't recommend it. I'd rather see you sew the clear vinyl window material like Strataglass, OC, Crystal Clear, Regalite, those types of things it does beautiful with. So SBCG3ZQ asks, I've been binge watching these videos for days. I hope you have some popcorn. I don't know if it's because I'm learning so much or because this guy has the best ASMR voice I've ever heard. What's AM?
It means they really like the sound of your voice. And
oh, okay. Thanks. I wish my wife did. So Ian asks, why refer to one person as we? I think he's saying, I do think I say that a lot in our tutorial videos at our Sayrite DIY channel. Well, that's because you, us, Sailrite as a crew, we're all in this together. McNolan, wait a minute, did you just pronounce the L in the Sayrite company name? All the other videos, it appears to be silent, which is correct. Whatever I say is correct, okay? Jimbo says, dude needs to learn how to pronounce Sailrite instead of Sailrite. I just said the same thing twice, didn't I? Waterboy asks, have you just stapled your finger, Eric? I haven't done that yet. It doesn't look fun though. I don't think I want to try it. Sorry. Tiger88i says, I need a gift from you. Yeah, well, I need one from you. Did people ask these questions? Jalfas asks, Eric, would you offer Cameo-style personalized videos for your fans? We've watched so many hours of your tutorials that you are a major celebrity in our house. I would love to. Everett asks, do you use mustache wax or just sewing machine oil? Well, I have plenty of sewing machine oil and I have very little mustache wax, so oil's better. Well, that's all the questions we have now, but we are more than happy to do this again. If you'd like to see a part 2, please leave us comments below. And as always, here at Sayrite, you're able to email us or call us, and we can definitely answer questions that way as well. I hope you've enjoyed this, and I hope these answers to your questions help you with your next project and motivate you to sew more.